Welcome back to On the Move with Victor Shi. This is Victor Shi once again coming to you live on Tuesday, December 6th. And today is a big day because today is the runoff election in Georgia when people are going to be going out there and voting. Already lines are very short. So if you're out there in Georgia, go out there and vote. This is a hugely critical election, especially for Gen Z, which helped decide Georgia back in 2018, back in 2020, 2021, few weeks ago. And I think this time around too, we have a huge role to play. So for anyone who knows anyone in Georgia, be sure to tell them to get out there and vote and make their voice heard because this election is so important. We talked about it a week ago during that deep dive about the importance of this 51st seat. This 51st seat is so critical for Democrats wanting to get something done in the Senate because what that means is for Democrats, they can have a majority on each committee. Right now, it's a 50-50 Senate. That means it's split between Democrats and Republicans, which means that every committee must have an even number of Democrats and Republicans. And in this era, the chances of bipartisanship or coming to agreement on something is very, very slim. And so having 51 senators makes all the difference for Democrats. If they want to get things passed, that means that every committee can have a common sense majority of people who believe in things like gun reform, people who believe in climate change. For judges and justices, that means that they can get passed at a quicker pace. And so for all of these things, it really helps Democrats to have Raphael Warnock. So if you live in Georgia, get out there and vote. Remember, you can vote as long as you get in line before polls close. So let's say your poll closes at 8 a.m. You can get in line at 7:59 p.m. and still vote. So make sure that you get in line, you vote. If you're not in Georgia, you can help out by texting, phone banking. There are some great resources out there that you can amplify in your social media channel. Make sure that you use every opportunity you can to help get out the vote in Georgia because this election is going to really be an election for generations to come. So Georgia's on my mind. So is South Carolina. I want to do a bit of a exploration to South Carolina as the first primary state for Democrats. Nothing's official yet. They have floated the idea of proposing South Carolina as the first primary state for Democrats in 2024. There's been a lot of talk about this move to switch from Iowa as the first primary state for Democrats to South Carolina. And several reasons, in my opinion, why I think this is a good move for I think Democrats for this party going into 2024. And this is coming from both someone who's involved in politics, but also someone who ran to become a delegate in 2020 and got elected to become a delegate and kind of saw a firsthand look into what the process is like. It can be a really confusing process sometimes. And I just want to shed light on this process of delegates and also doing the primary process. So back in 2020, I remember vividly, it was Iowa that was the first state, and then following that, New Hampshire. And one of the things I remember really clearly was that Iowa was a state that really, I think, wasn't representative of the Democratic electorate. What you saw in Iowa was a primarily white state. That was a state in which Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders did particularly well in. And then as the primary season went on, what I remembered is, we can all remember that one moment when Jim Clyburn said in front of a group of people that, we know Joe Biden, he knows us. And that was really what decided that primary election. And in South Carolina, that's why Joe Biden ended up being the presidential nominee for Democrats. And I think this whole entire point of the primary process is to really reflect the base and the best of the Democratic Party. And I think it's a test for presidential candidates too. Look, if you win in Iowa, that doesn't necessarily mean you can win in a state like South Carolina because the electorates are so different. In Iowa, you have a primarily white state. In South Carolina, you have a primarily black state. And which state is more representative of the Democratic base? I think it's South Carolina. I think it's a better test for someone who's running to become president in the Democratic Party. It's a real test of how someone responds to Black voters, how someone can gauge Black voters, how someone can get the Black voter support. And so I think it's a really important state for Democrats to start off in. I think very representative of that electorate. And I think an indication for anyone who's running to become president in the Democratic field, how well they can do, because that's, I think, at the end of the day, what the Democratic Party looks like. And so I think it's a great test for Democrats. It's also good to put candidates just out there in a state like South Carolina rather than Iowa. And I think it's a nice change of scene for a lot of kind of what we traditionally traditionally think of as the primary process. So basically, that's my thought on South Carolina. And then basically, what happens after South Carolina is you start seeing all these delegates roll in, and delegates are the ones who basically help the presidential candidate in a particular party get to ultimately the nominee. So at the end of the day, it's going to be all about the delegates. And I encourage anyone who's thinking about becoming a delegate, or who wants to become a delegate, definitely pay attention and try to get involved, because it's a very, very fun process. My biggest regret in 2020 was that it was during the pandemic and I couldn't actually be inside the arena when you saw all the balloons drop from the ceiling and that electrifying moment. But I'm suspecting in 2024, we'll see a bit of a different presidential convention, and hopefully one that's going to be in my home state, Illinois. There's been some talk about where that's going to be and how that's going to look like. But I hear Chicago might be at the top of that list. So definitely think ahead and see if you want to become a delegate for 2024. Yesterday, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments about whether a graphic designer can refuse to do business with same-sex couples. And the argument was basically, it was a pretty straightforward argument. You had both sides arguing their cases. And then at one point, it evolved somehow to talk about how Black and white Santas were kind of in the society, and also dating websites. And one of the most outrageous things, and perhaps this was jokingly, but still, I don't think this should be said in a joking manner, is that Justice Alito was responding to Justice Kagan and said, quote, "You do see a lot of Black children in Ku Klux Klan outfits, right?" The Supreme Court, you could hear laughter in the background, but that's something that's really insulting to a lot of Black people, I think. Something that's, one, I think not true. Even if he meant it sarcastically or jokingly, I think it's something for a Supreme Court justice to do, something where words really matter, language matters. It's yet another indication to a lot of people that the Supreme Court has a big credibility issue, I think. And for a lot of young people that saw this court literally overturn a right in front of their very own eyes, it's yet another indication that these justices just don't take their job seriously, I think. And I think it's a really concerning indication when you have Supreme Court justices who jokingly say that, you don't see a lot of, or I guess you do see a lot of Black children in Ku Klux Klan outfits. And I think that's something that we should all be paying attention to. And that comes, of course, after the heels of this leaked reporting that said that Justice Alito may have leaked the Hobby Lobby decision a few years ago. So it's a really, I think, concerning indication, and something that I think Chief Justice John Roberts should be paying closer attention to, what's happening within the Supreme Court, and something that I think we should all be alarmed about, because our Supreme Court justices, while they can joke from time to time, I don't think that's a joke that they should be spouting. So that's on my mind. One more thing that got released that I thought was a bit interesting, that speaks more about Gen Z and the culture, is there was a CNN article yesterday that I read that was titled, quote, "Who are the eager beaver holiday shoppers unhindered by inflation?" And the answer was Gen Z. Basically, the impetus of this article was that apparently on Black Friday this past year, Gen Z turned out at very high rates, not at the ballot box, but in stores. Gen Zers were the leading consumers. And the article was interesting, and I think accurate, in the sense that for a lot of Gen Zers, we not only kind of have deep values about, voting and kind of how we look at the world, but we also have a deep value for what we want to wear. So we really pay attention to the brand that we want to put on. We want to make sure that it's intentional and careful. We like that in-person shopping experience, no matter how much it may cost. And so that whole article was about how Gen Zers really wasn't bothered by inflation, and we turned out on Black Friday and spent money. And I think it wasn't just so much that we spent money, it's that we spent money on things that we cared about. So, items and brands that I think that we've seen on TikTok and social media, and that help us create our brand. And I think a lot of it is because of social media and TikTok, and seeing what other people have to wear, in their TikToks or their reels or on social media. And it also seems like young people just weren't as worried about the cost of inflation generally as maybe older generations. We weren't as burdened. A lot of us, I think, felt like, we have more money to spend. We aren't burdened by things like, having to pay taxes or gases or maybe rent like older generations. So we weren't as burdened, I think. So I think a lot of younger people felt like they could spend money on clothes and go out on Black Friday. But I just thought that was an interesting article that spoke about Gen Z and how we view the world and how we shop in the world. And I just thought, maybe everyone would be entertained by that. So that's all the news that's on my mind. And then I want to do a deeper dive into this concerning statement by the former president, this twice impeached, disgraced former president Donald Trump, about the termination of the US Constitution. And I think everyone should be really concerned. I know we all have a tendency to laugh it off, to just say this is yet another absurd comment by the former president that is ridiculous. And I think we shouldn't laugh this one off because it's really dangerous, even for the former president, to say it's really a concerning thing that all of us should be paying attention to, and all of us should be outraged by. And I just want to start off by reading what the former president took to Truth Social the other day over the weekend. He said, quote, "So with the revelation of massive and widespread fraud and deception, massive and widespread fraud and deception, by the way, are in all caps, in working closely with big tech companies, the DNC and the Democrat Party, do you throw the presidential election results of 2020 out and declare the rightful winner, or do you have a new election? A massive fraud of this type and magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles." Let me read that again. "A massive fraud of this type and magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. Our great, quote, founders did not want and would not condone false and fraudulent elections." I don't know where to begin, other than this is, I think, something that is clear. It's in plain language. The President of the United States called for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the US Constitution. Um, no matter what age you come from, whether you're Gen Z, whether you're a baby boomer, whether you're the silent generation, this is something that every single person should be concerned about. And more importantly, it should be something that every single elected official should be calling out. Yesterday, the White House said that what Trump was doing was against the soul of the nation, which is exactly right. This is antithetical to every single value that we hold near and dear to our hearts as American citizens. The White House also called on Republican elected officials to reaffirm their oath of office. And I just want to run down the list of some of what Republicans have said. And while I've compiled a list of Republicans that have come out and spoken against Donald Trump, I want to say the vast majority of Republican officials still have yet to do so. But let's start with Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota. He said, quote, "We should never dishonor the oath." That oath, he said, "No one is above the Constitution. Anyone who desires to lead our country must commit to protecting the Constitution. They should not threaten to terminate it." Exactly right. That's something that should be easy. That's something that every Republican should be saying right now. Yet you have very few voices. The next one that I saw was Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. She also condemned Trump's comments, and she said, quote, "Suggesting the termination of the US Constitution is not only a betrayal of our oath of office, it's an affront to our republic." Again, very true, something that should be easy, something that every single Republican should say. And even Mike Pence yesterday, he's someone who has been a Trump sycophant since the beginning. He said, quote, "Everyone that serves in public office, everyone that aspires to serve or to serve again should make it clear that we will support and defend the Constitution of the United States." That's former Vice President Mike Pence. And then last, I think, and best, is Liz Cheney. She called out Trump directly and said, quote, "No honest person can deny that Trump is an enemy of the US Constitution," end quote. I mean, all of these Republicans are right. I don't think we should be giving them any applaud. There should be the bare minimum for every single Republican elected official out there who has any semblance of dignity and oath of office. But yet again, like I said, the vast majority of Republicans have either evaded that question or continue saying that they'll support whoever the nominee is, whether it's Trump or anyone else. And I think at this point, no Republican elected official should be supporting a Trump candidacy because that's what Trump believes in. He wants to overturn the US Constitution. And anyone who thinks that he deserves to be the nominee is, I think, a betrayer of the US Constitution. And again, this is absurd even for Trump, and every elected official should be calling this out in the strongest terms possible. So that's kind of the response part. But I want all of us to imagine and be outraged by this and just kind of look at what it would mean if we didn't have a US Constitution. If Donald Trump's goal of terminating the US Constitution came into fruition, what would that look like? And I fear not enough people understand what having democracy would look like. So I want to quickly go over that point. So first, I think that a good starting off point is looking at the whole point of our US Constitution. The whole point of having a constitution, it's a document that binds this nation together. If anyone who has taken a history class or has taken a civics class, they might remember that this is a document that opens up with 3 words, quote, "we the people." That short but simple phrase affirms everything that this nation is about. We are a democracy. We are a republic that is by and for the people. The Constitution also lays out the fundamental rights that we so desperately need and cherish in this country. Things like the First Amendment, protecting and establishing freedom of press, religion, assembly, protest, and petition, the right to speedy, fair trial, women's suffrage, 18-year-olds being able to vote. All of these things are so important in the US Constitution, equal protection under law. These are things that make our country stronger. These are things that make America unique. This is this is the reason why so many people from other countries want to come to America so they can see a better life. They can, have the freedom to assemble. They can have the freedom to protest. Journalists can have the ability to report freely without being censored or reprimanded. All of these things are so valuable for this nation, everything that we stand for. But the moment that we don't have a US Constitution, all of that goes away. And there's a great website out there that I encourage all of our audience to check out, and it's called Freedom House, and it's all about exploring freedom and democracy and what it looks like in countries that don't have freedom and democracy. And I want to give you all an example just to pull from a country that Freedom House rates as a country with very low freedom and democracy, is China. They split it into 3 buckets. The first is obstacles to access. The second is limits in content. And the third is violations on user rights. And so I just pulled some examples from Freedom House. And the first bucket that I want to just kind of briefly mention is obstacles to access. So these are things like the infrastructure in China is limited to basically restrict access to the internet. The speed and quality of interconnection is very slow. The government exercises huge amounts of technical and legal control over internet infrastructure for the purposes of restricting connectivity. So that kind of gives you a sense of how people in China just aren't able to access the internet. They aren't able to spread things. They aren't able to just kind of take to social media or other websites and just access information. The second is limits on content. Freedom House says that China basically does a lot to block or filter or compel service providers to block or filter internet content, particularly material that is protected by international human rights standards. Non-state actors employ legal and other means to force publishers and other digital platforms to delete content. So basically, anything that we post now, basically all of that's out the window because the government heavily regulates what can be posted and blocks and filters certain things that may be deemed harmful or maybe goes against the government and what they want. And lastly is violations of user agreements. So the Constitution in China fails to protect rights such as freedom of expression, access to information, and press freedoms. Individuals are penalized for online activities, particularly those protected under international human rights standards again. So everything that we hold so close to ourselves right now as Americans will be out the door without a constitution. You can just look at a country like China. Everything that we would say would be under heavy scrutiny, would be monitored by the government. There would be no democratic elections. There would be no ability to vote freely. Journalists and dissenters would be imprisoned. There would be no separation of powers in the government. So I go back to the first presidency of Donald Trump. Remember all of those impeachment trials? Those were an indication that our democracy was working. We had checks and balances. We had separation of powers that would hold the president to account. We had a Congress that would function. Those are things that make this country so strong. And this is something that I hope every single person, whether you're Gen Z or older, will be angry and outraged about. This is what should fuel us going into 2024, because we can't allow someone like Trump to win and terminate the US Constitution, because there are so many countries out there that face a similar problem. And I think for all of us who maybe can't imagine it, we just have to look at like a place like China or another country that has low freedom and doesn't have a democracy to see what our country could look like. And we all have to do something about it to stop this, whether it's talking to our friends, talking to a Republican, talking to a Trump supporter. We have the power to really change the conversation. And at the end of the day, there are more of us than there are of them. And we can all make this democracy strong and intact if we all do our part and get out there and vote. And that's why I think today is going to be really important with Raphael Warnock and this Georgia race, and why we should all be doing what we can to help Georgia get the 51st Democratic seat. And, after Georgia, we should all be hands on deck in terms of helping Joe Biden hopefully win presidency again and defeating Donald Trump. That's all I have for you today. I hope we can all think a little bit more about what this termination to the US Constitution really entails, how dangerous that is, even for the former president. And just in the remaining hours that we have until polls close in Georgia, making sure that we get out there, volunteer, encourage all of our friends in Georgia to get out there and vote. Georgia's on my mind the entire day. You can follow my analysis of what's happening there throughout the day on Twitter at Victor Shi 2020. I'm on other platforms too, but make sure you follow me there so you can stay up to date in Georgia. There's some really exciting things going on, I think, and I think we're going to be seeing some good results. So I remain bullish, but we can't take anything for granted. I will be back tomorrow for another episode of On the Move with Victor Shi. I hope you'll join me at 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Share this video with anyone who is Gen Z or anyone who wants to learn more about the news of the day. And you can subscribe to us on YouTube at youtube.com/Politicon. Be sure to like this page, like this video, like this page, and click the bell for a weekly notification so you don't miss a single episode. I will see you tomorrow, and thanks so much for watching.